I never thought I'd find myself at this crossroad, choosing between my husband and the legacy my uncle left me. When Nate demanded I sign over my inheritance, he had no idea I'd already been planning what to do with his company. But that decision wasn't made overnight. It was the culmination of years of small compromises that eventually broke me. Before we jump in, tell me where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My Uncle Charlie always told me that a woman should have her own means. Nessa, he'd say with that weathered smile of his, never put yourself in a position where someone else controls your future. It was advice I'd nodded at but never truly internalized. Not until it was almost too late. I met Nathan Morgan at a charity gala in Seattle 7 years ago. He stood out immediately, tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, with a confidence that commanded attention. I was there representing my marketing firm, still climbing the corporate ladder, while he was already a partner at Morgan Financial Partners, a boutique investment firm, making waves in the Pacific Northwest. Our first conversation lasted 3 hours. We discussed everything from market trends to our favorite hidden restaurants in the city. By the end of the night, I was captivated. Nate had a way of making me feel like the most fascinating person in the room, hanging on my every word while simultaneously impressing me with his ambition and drive. We were married 18 months later in a lavish ceremony at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel. My parents beamed with pride. Their daughter had landed a catch, a man from a good family with excellent prospects. Not that they'd ever say it out loud, but I could see it in the way they introduced him to distant relatives. This is Nathan, Vanessa's husband. He runs his own financial firm. The first 3 years were almost perfect. We moved into a stunning, high-rise condo in downtown Seattle with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. I continued my work in marketing while Nate's business expanded. We traveled to Europe twice a year, dined at the best restaurants, and began talking about starting a family. The first crack appeared so subtly I almost missed it. We were discussing a potential investment in a vacation property, and I suggested we look at a charming cabin near Lake Chelan. That's not really the caliber of property we should be investing in, Nate said dismissively. We need something that reflects our status. I'm thinking Aspen or maybe the Hamptons. I tried to explain that Lake Chelan held special childhood memories for me, but he cut me off with, sentimentality is a poor investment strategy, Nessa. That night, I let it go. It seemed trivial to argue over a vacation home we hadn't even purchased yet. But looking back, that moment was significant. It was the first time I clearly saw that Nate valued appearance over meaning, status over sentiment. The pattern continued. Small moments where my preferences were overruled for the sake of what Nate deemed appropriate for our lifestyle. The interior designer I wanted to hire was replaced with one Eleanor, Nate's mother, recommended. My idea to host casual dinner parties gave way to formal gatherings with Nate's business associates. My career, once a source of pride, became something Nate subtly undermined. You work so hard for what they pay you, he'd say with a sympathetic smile. Maybe it's time to consider scaling back. It's not like we need the money. Every suggestion to step back from my career was couched in concern for my well-being, but the subtext was clear. My professional identity was becoming inconvenient to his vision of our life together. Then came the arguments about finances. Despite his wealth and my own comfortable salary, Nate insisted on knowing every penny I spent. When I questioned some of his business expenses, he responded with cold anger. I handle the financial decisions in this marriage, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. That's what I do professionally, Vanessa. I'd appreciate if you trusted my judgment. The worst part was that I did begin to doubt myself. Maybe he was right. Financial management was his profession, after all. Maybe I was being unnecessarily stubborn about maintaining my independence. Our fights followed a predictable pattern. Nate would make a unilateral decision. I would object. He would become distant, sometimes disappearing to work late for days. The silence in our beautiful condo would become unbearable until I eventually apologized. Not because I believed I was wrong, but because I couldn't stand the emptiness anymore. And then, like magic, the charming, attentive Nate would return. He'd bring flowers, book a weekend getaway, remind me why I'd fallen in love with him. For a while, everything would be perfect again. Uncle Charlie saw through it all. During one of our occasional lunches, meetings Nate subtly discouraged, because Charlie was eccentric and not part of the polished social circle Nate preferred. My uncle watched me with concerned eyes. "You don't smile the way you used to, Nessa," he said simply. "What's happening to my firecracker of a niece?" I brushed it off, made excuses about work stress. But Uncle Charlie wasn't fooled. As we parted, he squeezed my hand and said, "Remember who you are. I've seen too many bright flames dimmed by the wrong partnerships." I didn't know then that it would be our last conversation. Uncle Charlie passed away 3 weeks later from a heart attack, leaving me grief-stricken and adrift. Nate was supportive, in the performative ways. He handled funeral arrangements, greeted mourners with appropriate solemnity, and held my hand during the service. But when I broke down sobbing in our bedroom that night, truly processing that the man who'd been like a second father to me was gone, Nate awkwardly patted my shoulder and said, "You need to pull yourself together, Vanessa. The memorial reception is tomorrow, and the Hadleys will be there. We need to present a united front." That night, something hardened inside me. I realized I was married to a man who saw even my grief as something to be managed for appearances. 2 months after the funeral, I was called to Uncle Charlie's attorney's office. I expected some small bequest, perhaps his collection of first edition, books he knew I admired or the antique desk I'd always loved. Instead, I was stunned to learn that Charlie had left me controlling interest in Westridge Innovations, the tech manufacturing company he'd built from the ground up over 40 years. He was very specific, Mr. Daniels, the attorney, explained. "The shares are to be transferred directly to you, not to be considered marital property." He also left this letter. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. "My dear Nessa, if you're reading this, I've finally run out of clever comebacks. Don't be sad for too long. I've had a good run. I'm leaving you Westridge not because you're my favorite niece, though you are, but because you have the vision and heart this company needs. I've watched you navigate the corporate world with integrity and intelligence. More importantly, I've seen how you treat people with respect regardless of their position. Westridge employs over 200 people in Boise. They're counting on you to lead wisely. The company is stable but needs innovation to grow. You'll find my notes on potential directions in the blue folder in my office safe. One last thing. This company is yours. Not your husband's, not your parents', not anybody else's to direct. I've structured this inheritance specifically to ensure that. Mr. Daniels has all the legal details. Trust yourself, Nessa. You've always had better instincts than you give yourself credit for. All my love, Charlie." I sat in stunned silence, tears streaming down my face. Even from beyond the grave, Uncle Charlie was looking out for me, giving me not just a company, but a reminder of who I used to be. Someone with vision, with backbone, with independence. Mr. Daniels cleared his throat. "There's something else you should know, Ms. Lambert. Your uncle modified his will just 3 weeks before his passing. He was quite insistent on the specific language regarding your inheritance. 3 weeks before, right after our last lunch together. He had seen something in me that day, something that worried him enough to specifically protect me in his will. The company is doing well," Mr. Daniels continued. "The management team is solid, but they'll need direction from you regarding larger, strategic decisions." I nodded, my mind racing. I'll need to review the financials, meet the executive team, understand the current projects. For the first time in months, perhaps years, I felt a spark of genuine excitement. That excitement lasted precisely until I told Nate about my inheritance. We were having dinner at home. Our housekeeper had prepared Nate's favorite seafood linguine before leaving for the evening. I'd opened a bottle of the Pouilly Fuissé we'd discovered on our trip to France the previous year, hoping the pleasant setting might help with what I anticipated would be a complex conversation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Westridge Innovations? Nate repeated, setting down his fork. Charlie's company? The manufacturing outfit in Boise? I nodded, trying to contain my enthusiasm. It's actually more than just manufacturing now. They've expanded into custom tech solutions for medium-sized businesses. The revenue has been growing steadily for the past 3 years. Nate dabbed his mouth with his napkin, his expression calculating. Well, this is unexpected, but it could be quite the opportunity. Derek and I have been looking to diversify our portfolio beyond pure financial services. Derek Foster was Nate's business partner and oldest friend. The two had started Morgan Financial Partners right out of business school, and their friendship had always seemed to involve a competitive edge that made me uncomfortable. What do you mean? I asked, though a sinking feeling told me I already knew. We could absorb Westridge into our holding company, Nate said, his excitement building. Use their established manufacturing channels to support some of our clients' ventures. The tax advantages alone would be significant. He pulled out his phone and began typing rapidly. I'll set up a meeting with our corporate attorney tomorrow. We'll need to move quickly on the paperwork. Nate, I interrupted, Uncle Charlie left Westridge to me, not to us. To me specifically. He looked up from his phone, his expression a mixture of amusement and condescension. Yes, technically, but we're married, Nessa. What's yours is mine, isn't that the deal? It's not a marital asset, I said, recalling Mr. Daniels's precise words. Charlie structured it very specifically. Nate's expression hardened. Don't be difficult about this. You don't know the first thing about running a company. I've been in corporate marketing for 10 years, I reminded him. I understand business strategy, brand positioning, market expansion. Playing with ad campaigns isn't the same as real business, he cut in. This is exactly what I do, Vanessa. I build and manage companies. This is my area of expertise. I want to honor Charlie's wishes, I insisted. He trusted me with this. Nate set down his phone with deliberate care. Your uncle was a sentimental old man who never fully understood how modern business works. Westridge is wasted as a standalone company when it could be leveraged as part of our larger portfolio. The casual dismissal of Uncle Charlie stung. I'm not signing anything right now, I said firmly. I need time to think, to understand what I've inherited. There's nothing to understand, Nate said, his voice taking on the icy edge I'd come to dread. You're going to sign the company over to our joint holding corporation, and we'll handle it from there. This isn't a discussion, Vanessa. Actually, it is a discussion, I replied, surprising myself with my steady voice. And it's not a decision. I'm making tonight. Nate stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I have a call with Tokyo in an hour. We'll talk about this when you're being more reasonable. He left the dining room without another word, leaving me alone with a half-eaten dinner and the realization that my husband had never once asked what I wanted to do with my inheritance. He'd simply assumed control, as he always did. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept rereading Uncle Charlie's letter, thinking about his faith in me and the way Nate had so casually dismissed both Charlie's judgment and my capabilities. Around 3 a.m., I slipped out of bed and went to my home office, a space that had gradually shrunk over the years as Nate's needs for home workspace expanded. I opened my laptop and began researching Westridge Innovations in earnest. The company website was somewhat outdated, but showed a solid foundation. They specialized in custom hardware solutions for specific industry needs, more sophisticated than I had realized. Their client list was impressive for a company of their size. Then I found the employee page, photos of smiling staff at company, picnics, volunteer events, and award ceremonies. These were the people Uncle Charlie had entrusted to me. People with families, mortgages, dreams of their own. They weren't just assets to be absorbed into Nate's corporate empire. By dawn, I had made a decision. I needed to see Westridge for myself before making any decisions. I needed to honor Uncle Charlie's faith in me by at least understanding what he had built. I booked a flight to Boise for the following week, telling Nate it was a necessary fact-finding mission before we made any decisions about the company. He wasn't happy but conceded that having more information about the asset would be useful. What I didn't tell him was that I had also scheduled a private meeting with Mr. Daniels to better understand the legal protections Charlie had put in place regarding my inheritance. The morning of my flight to Boise, Nate handed me a thick manila envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "Just some standard paperwork for you to sign," he said casually. "Power of attorney and transfer documents so we can start the integration process while you're getting the lay of the land there." I took the envelope but didn't open it. "I'll review it when I get back. It would really be better if we had it processed before you meet with their executive team," Nate pressed, "so you can speak with authority about the future direction." I looked at my husband, handsome, confident, utterly certain of his right to control this situation, and felt a strange calm settle over me. "I'm not signing anything until I understand exactly what I'm dealing with," I said, tucking the envelope into my bag. "That's just good business, isn't it?" For a moment, genuine surprise flickered across Nate's face, quickly replaced by his professional smile. "Of course, just trying to be efficient." He kissed my cheek. "Have a good trip, honey. Let me know what you find out." As my plane took off from SeaTac Airport, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I was doing something completely on my own terms. I had no idea where this path would lead, but Uncle Charlie's words echoed in my mind. "Trust yourself, Nessa. You've always had better instincts than you give yourself credit for." I pulled out my notebook and began jotting down questions I wanted to ask at Westridge. For once, I wasn't second-guessing myself or wondering what Nate would think. This was my inheritance, my responsibility, and, just maybe, my chance to reclaim the woman I used to be. Little did I know that this trip would be the first step in unraveling everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my husband's business, and most importantly, myself. The company Uncle Charlie left me wouldn't just change my professional life. It would ultimately give me the strength to walk away from a man who had spent years gradually dimming my light. But first, I had to understand what I was walking into, and what exactly Nathan Morgan was so eager to get his hands on. When the plane touched down in Boise, I felt both nervous and exhilarated. I'd visited the city a handful of times with Uncle Charlie over the years, but this was different. I wasn't just a visitor anymore. I was arriving as the new owner of one of the city's established businesses. The rental car company had upgraded me to a modest SUV, nothing like the luxury vehicles Nate insisted we drive in Seattle. There was something refreshing about its simplicity. I programmed the Westridge Innovations address into the GPS and set off, windows down, breathing in the crisp Idaho air. Westridge headquarters was located in an industrial park on the outskirts of the city, a sprawling single-story building with an understated sign displaying the company logo. The parking lot was about 3/4 full, with spaces near the entrance marked for visitors. I pulled in, checking my reflection in the rearview mirror before stepping out. I'd deliberately dressed in what I thought of as approachable professional, a navy blazer over a simple blouse and well-tailored pants, Not the designer labels Nate preferred I wear to his business functions, but clothes that felt more authentically me. At the reception desk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes looked up from her computer. "Welcome to Westridge Innovations. How can I help you today?" "My name is Vanessa Lambert," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "I'm Charlie Lambert's niece." Her expression transformed immediately. "Ms. Lambert, we've been expecting you." She stood and extended her hand. "I'm Margaret Wilkins. I was your uncle's administrative assistant for 15 years. Please call me Vanessa, or Nessa." I smiled, shaking her hand warmly. "Uncle Charlie mentioned you often. He said you were the one who really ran this place." Margaret's eyes misted slightly. "Your uncle was too generous with his praise. We're all still reeling from his loss." She composed herself and pressed a button on her desk phone. "Martin, Ms. Lambert has arrived. Shall I bring her to the conference room?" A moment later, I was following Margaret down a hallway, lined with framed patents and company milestones. Staff members glanced up curiously as we passed, some offering small smiles or nods of acknowledgement. The conference room was already occupied when we arrived. 5 people rose as I entered. 3 men and 2 women of varying ages, all regarding me with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. A tall man with salt and pepper hair stepped forward. "Ms. Lambert, I'm Martin Reeves, COO of Westridge. Charlie spoke highly of you. On behalf of the entire executive team, I want to express our condolences for your loss." After introductions to the rest of the team, the CFO, CTO, HR director, and sales director, we settled around the conference table. For the next 2 hours, they walked me through presentations on the company's history, current projects, financial standing, and future prospects. I took detailed notes, asked questions, and was impressed by the clear, straightforward answers I received. Westridge, I learned, was financially solid but at a crossroads. Their traditional manufacturing business was stable, but not growing significantly. The innovative side of the business, custom tech solutions, showed tremendous promise but needed investment to reach its potential. "Your uncle was beginning to pivot the company in this direction," explained Sanjay Patel, the CTO, a brilliant engineer in his 40s who had been with Westridge for over a decade. "He saw how our specialized knowledge could be applied to emerging markets." As the meeting concluded, Martin hesitated before asking, "If you don't mind my asking, Ms. Lambert, what are your plans for Westridge?" 5 pairs of eyes focused intently on me. These people had dedicated years, some even decades, to building this company alongside Uncle Charlie. Their livelihoods and professional identities were tied to its future. "I'm still learning," I admitted. Honestly. Uncle Charlie trusted me with Westridge for a reason, and I intend to honor that trust. What I can promise is that I won't make any major decisions without understanding their full impact on the company and the people who work here. Something in the room shifted, a subtle release of tension. These weren't just employees. They had been Charlie's extended family in many ways. And now, they were cautiously accepting me as part of that family too. "Charlie always said you had good judgment." Martin nodded approvingly. "We'll support whatever direction you choose." After the meeting, Sanjay offered to give me a tour of the facility. As we walked through the production floor, research lab, and engineering department, I was struck by the obvious pride employees took in their work. They greeted Sanjay with genuine respect and me with polite curiosity. In the fabrication area, I paused to watch a technician meticulously assembling what Sanjay informed me was a custom sensor array for a medical device company. "Each one is hand-calibrated," Sanjay explained. "Our precision is why clients come to us instead of larger manufacturers. We build components that absolutely cannot fail." "Life-critical systems," I murmured, remembering Uncle Charlie using that phrase. Sanjay nodded, pleased. "Exactly. Not everything we make goes into medical devices. but we approach every project with that level of care. At the end of the tour, Sanjay hesitated. There's one more thing you might want to see. It's not officially part of the tour, but he led me to a door marked R&D Lab B. Inside was what looked like a creative chaos, workbenches covered with prototypes, walls papered with technical drawings and sticky notes, whiteboards filled with equations and diagrams. This was Charlie's special project space, Sanjay explained. He gave select engineers time to explore new ideas here, regardless of immediate commercial potential. I moved through the space slowly, touching nothing but taking it all in. This is where innovation happens, I said softly. Exactly. Most of our breakthrough products started as experiments in this room. Sanjay hesitated again. Your uncle, he had his own workspace here. Would you like to see it? In the corner was a simple desk with a computer, surrounded by bookshelves filled with technical manuals, industry journals, and surprisingly, philosophy books. On the desk sat a framed photo of a much younger Charlie with his arm around my mother, his sister. Next to it was a picture of me at my college graduation. My throat tightened. I had no idea he kept these here. He was immensely proud of you, Sanjay said quietly. He often spoke about your marketing insights, how you understood people and what motivated them. I ran my fingers lightly over the desk, feeling closer to Uncle Charlie than I had since his funeral. Thank you for showing me this. After the tour, I spent another hour meeting with the HR director to understand the company culture, benefits, structure, and employee concerns. By the time I left Westridge, the sun was setting over the mountains in the distance, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Instead of heading straight to my hotel, I drove to a small diner Uncle Charlie had taken me to on previous visits. The Bluebird Cafe was exactly as I remembered, checkered tablecloths, vinyl booths, and the smell of homemade pie wafting through the air. I slid into a booth by the window and ordered coffee and a slice of huckleberry pie. As I waited, I reviewed my notes from the day, trying to organize my thoughts. Westridge was far more impressive than I had imagined. Not just a manufacturing company, but a specialized innovation partner for its clients. When the waitress brought my pie, I almost laughed out loud. It was served on the same blue willow, pattern plates Uncle Charlie had in his cabin, another small connection to him that warmed my heart. I pulled out my phone, intending to check my email, when I saw 6 missed calls from Nate and a string of increasingly impatient text messages. Called the office. They said your meeting ended hours ago. Update? Why aren't you answering your phone? I need to know how things went before my meeting with Derek tomorrow. Vanessa, this is unprofessional. Call me immediately. I put the phone down without responding and took a bite of pie instead. The sweet tart flavor of huckleberries brought back memories of hiking with Uncle Charlie, collecting berries in the mountains, and his patient explanations of which plants were edible and which were not. For the first time in years, I felt I was exactly where I needed to be, making decisions based on my own judgment rather than anticipating Nate's reactions. The realization was both liberating and terrifying. When I finally returned to my hotel room, I called Nate. He answered on the first ring. Finally, he said, not bothering to hide his irritation. I've been trying to reach you all day. I was in meetings, I replied calmly, and then I took some time to process everything I learned. Well, what's the verdict? What are we working with? I chose my words carefully. Westridge is impressive, Nate. They have proprietary technology, a dedicated team, and solid client relationships. The financials are strong. Excellent, he said, his tone immediately warming. This is even better than we thought. I've already spoken with our attorneys about the fastest way to integrate them into our structure. I haven't made any decisions yet, I reminded him. I'm still learning about the company. Don't overthink this, Nessa. The longer we wait, the more value we potentially lose. Just sign the documents I gave you and scan them to me tomorrow. I'm not signing anything yet, I said firmly. This is Uncle Charlie's legacy. I owe it to him to understand it completely before making any changes. There was a long silence before Nate spoke again, his voice tight with controlled anger. Your sentimentality is getting in the way of good business. This isn't about your uncle anymore. It's about maximizing an unexpected asset. It's not just an asset, I countered. It's 200 people's livelihoods. People adapt, he said dismissively. Business evolves. That's how it works. I thought about Margaret's decades of loyalty, Sanjay's brilliant innovations, and the pride I'd seen on the production floor. I need more time. Time for what exactly? To play business owner? Vanessa, be realistic. You have no experience running a company. His condescension ignited something in me. Maybe it's time I gained that experience. What are you saying? Nate's voice had taken on a dangerous edge. I'm saying I'm considering taking an active role in Westridge's management. The silence that followed was deafening. When Nate finally spoke, his voice was cold and controlled. I see. Well, it sounds like you need time to come to your senses. We'll discuss this when you return to Seattle. He hung up without saying goodbye. I stared at the phone in my hand, my heart racing. I had just directly opposed Nate on something he cared deeply about, something that affected his business plans. In 7 years of marriage, I had never held my ground this firmly against him. Instead of the fear or guilt I expected to feel, I was surprised to discover a sense of calm resolve. Uncle Charlie had trusted me with this responsibility, and for the first time in years, I was trusting myself. The next morning, I met with Mr. Daniels, Uncle Charlie's attorney, in his downtown Boise office. The building was modest compared to the gleaming skyscrapers where Nate's attorneys worked, but the reception area was warm and welcoming. Mr. Daniels was a thoughtful man in his 60s with a deliberate way of speaking that inspired confidence. He walked me through the details of my inheritance with meticulous care. Your uncle was very specific about the structure, he explained. The controlling interest in Westridge was transferred to you personally, not to your marital estate. In Idaho, as in Washington, inheritances are generally considered separate property unless commingled with marital assets. And what exactly does that mean in practical terms? I asked. It means that unless you explicitly transfer the shares to joint ownership with your husband or use company funds for marital expenses, Westridge remains solely your property. He adjusted his glasses. Charlie was quite insistent on this point. He added several layers of protection that would be challenging to circumvent. I nodded, remembering Uncle Charlie's letter. He mentioned something about his notes on the company's future. Do you know anything about that? Mr. Daniels opened a drawer in his desk and removed a blue file folder. He left this with me to give to you. Inside was a detailed strategic plan for Westridge's next 5 years, focusing on expanding their custom technology solutions while gradually shifting away from generic manufacturing. Charlie had identified several emerging markets where Westridge's expertise could be especially valuable, along with potential partnerships and acquisition targets. More surprising were the personal notes in the margins, observations about key employees, clients who needed extra attention, and potential pitfalls to avoid. This wasn't just a business plan, it was a roadmap created specifically for me, incorporating both business strategy and human insight. He spent months on this, Mr. Daniels said quietly. After his last checkup, when his doctor found the heart irregularities, he became quite focused on ensuring Westridge would continue to thrive. I ran my fingers over Uncle Charlie's distinctive handwriting. He never told me he was having heart problems. He didn't want to worry you. Mr. Daniels hesitated. Ms. Lambert, I hope you don't mind my saying this, but Charlie was concerned about more than just his health in his final months. He was concerned about you. I looked up. What do you mean? The additional legal protections around your inheritance weren't standard procedure. When I asked why he felt they were necessary, he said something that has stayed with me. I need to make sure Nessa has something that's truly hers, something no one can take from her or convince her to give away. The words hit me like a physical blow. Uncle Charlie had seen what I had been trying so hard not to see, that I had gradually surrendered my autonomy in my marriage. He hadn't just left me a company, he had thrown me a lifeline. "There's something else," Mr. Daniels continued, pulling another document from his drawer. "Your uncle established a trust that will provide you with a personal income separate from Westridge profits. He was quite clear that this was to ensure you would always have financial independence, regardless of your decisions about the company." I blinked back tears. He thought of everything. "Charlie was a planner," Mr. Daniels smiled sadly, "and he cared deeply about your welfare." After the meeting, I wandered through downtown Boise, Uncle Charlie's blue folder clutched in my hand. The city was bustling but relaxed, so different from the constant intensity of Seattle. I found a quiet coffee shop and settled at a corner table to review the contents of the folder more thoroughly. As I read through Charlie's detailed notes, a picture emerged of a company poised for significant growth if steered in the right direction. The technical capabilities already existed. What was needed was strategic marketing and business development to bring their innovations to a wider market. Marketing, my area of expertise. I thought about the direction Nate wanted to take, absorbing Westridge into his financial empire, likely stripping its assets and discarding what didn't immediately serve his purposes. How many of those 200 employees would still have jobs a year later? How much of Uncle Charlie's vision would survive? My phone buzzed with a text from Nate. "Derek and I had a productive meeting about Westridge integration. Sending you revised paperwork to sign. Critical this moves forward quickly." I put the phone away without responding. Instead, I opened my laptop and began drafting a different kind of document. A preliminary marketing strategy for Westridge based on Uncle Charlie's vision, but incorporating my own expertise. 3 hours later, I had the bones of a plan that excited me more than any project I'd worked on in years. It would require commitment, innovation, and hard work, but it could transform Westridge from a solid regional manufacturer to a recognized industry leader in specialized technology solutions. I was so engrossed that I almost missed my phone ringing. It wasn't Nate this time, but my office in Seattle. "Vanessa Lambert," I answered automatically. "Nessa, it's Zoe." Zoe Chen was a colleague I'd worked closely with for several years. Brilliant at digital strategy, and one of the few people at the company who had never been intimidated by Nate's occasional appearances at work functions. "Zoe, hi. Everything okay there?" "That's actually why I'm calling. Things are a bit strange. Your husband came by earlier looking for you." I frowned. "Nate was at the office? Why?" "He said he needed some files from your computer for a joint project you're working on. Something about a company you've inherited?" When I told him I couldn't give him access to your computer, he got insistent. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. What happened? "I stood my ground," Zoe said, a hint of pride in her voice. "Told him company policy prevented me from allowing anyone access to another employee's workstation, regardless of personal relationship. He wasn't happy." "I can imagine," I said, my mind racing. What files could Nate possibly need from my work computer? "That's not all," Zoe continued. "After he left, I noticed someone had attempted to access your email remotely. Our IT security flagged it." The coldness spread. When exactly was this? About an hour after he left the office. Nate had tried to hack into my work email. The implications were staggering. What was he looking for? What did he think I might have there? "Thanks for letting me know, Zoe. I really appreciate you watching out for me." "Of course." She paused. "Nessa, is everything okay? You know you can talk to me if you need to." For a moment, I was tempted to confide in her. About Westridge, about Nate's behavior, about the growing realization that my marriage was built on control rather than partnership. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. "I'm figuring some things out," I said finally. "But knowing I have friends like you helps more than you know." After we hung up, I sat staring at my laptop screen, trying to make sense of Nate's actions. The only explanation was that he was looking for information about Westridge, perhaps correspondence with Mr. Daniels or notes about my inheritance. But why go to such lengths? What was he afraid I might know or do? The answer came to me with startling clarity. Nate was afraid I might actually take control of Westridge myself. That I might step outside the carefully constructed role of supportive wife he had created for me. I closed my laptop and gathered my things. There was one more place I needed to visit before making any decisions. Uncle Charlie's cabin sat on 3 acres just outside the city limits, nestled among ponderosa pines with a view of the foothills. I'd spent summers here as a teenager, hiking with Charlie, learning to fish in the nearby stream, sitting on the porch as he told stories about my mother when they were young. The key was still hidden in the same spot, under a stone turtle sculpture by the front steps. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood and a faint hint of Charlie's pipe tobacco. Everything was exactly as I remembered. The mismatched but comfortable furniture, the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, the collection of interesting rocks and pine cones on the mantel. I moved through the space slowly, running my fingers over familiar surfaces, remembering. In the small study off the living room, Charlie's desk was neat and organized, his reading glasses still placed precisely where he would have left them. On the corkboard above the desk were photos spanning decades, Charlie with his parents, with my mother, with various friends and colleagues. In the center was a picture of me at about 16, laughing as I tried to bait a fishing hook while Charlie looked on with amused pride. I sank into his desk chair and opened the top drawer, finding neatly arranged pens, paper clips, and a small, leather notebook. Flipping through it, I discovered it was a journal of sorts. Brief observations about nature, ideas for inventions, and occasional personal reflections. The entry from our last lunch together caught my eye immediately. Lunch. With Nessa today. She's lost something vital. That spark. That determination. She chooses her words so carefully now, always looking over her shoulder metaphorically. This isn't the niece I know. Her husband has gradually confined her spirit. She doesn't see it yet, but I do. Need to find a way to help her remember who she is. Tears spilled onto the page. Uncle Charlie had seen what I had been unable to acknowledge, that my marriage had slowly eroded my sense of self. That the woman I had become with Nate was a pale imitation of who I truly was. I closed the journal and returned it to the drawer, wiping my eyes. As I did, my gaze fell on a framed quote on the wall that I'd never paid much attention to before. "The most courageous act is still to think for yourself." Aloud. Coco Chanel. In that moment, sitting in Uncle Charlie's study, surrounded by memories of a time when I had been bolder and more authentic, I made my decision. I pulled out my phone and made 3 calls in rapid succession. First to Martin Reeves, at Westridge, requesting an emergency meeting with the executive team for the following morning. Second to Mr. Daniels, asking him to prepare certain documents and join me at that meeting. Third to Zoe, with a proposition that left her momentarily speechless before she enthusiastically agreed. I deliberately did not call Nate. Instead, I sent a brief text. "Still in Boise. Need more time to evaluate Westridge. Will be in touch when I have a clearer picture." His response was immediate. "This isn't a request, Vanessa. Sign the documents and come home." I turned off my phone and put it away. For the first time in our relationship, I wasn't going to do what Nate demanded. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. That night, I slept in the cabin's spare bedroom, surrounded by the quiet of the woods and the distant hooting of an owl. I slept more soundly than I had in years, without the constant low-grade anxiety that had become my normal state in Seattle. Morning brought clarity and purpose. I showered, dressed in clothes I'd purchased in Boise the previous day, a simple but elegant pantsuit that felt more authentically me than anything in my Seattle closet, and headed to Westridge for my meeting. The executive team was waiting in the conference room, expressions curious and slightly concerned. Mr. Daniels arrived moments later, legal documents in hand. "Thank you all for meeting on such short notice," I began. "I've spent the past few days learning about Westridge, its history, its capabilities, and most importantly, its potential. I've also reviewed Uncle Charlie's vision for the company's future. I distributed copies of the strategy document I'd worked on the previous day. This is a preliminary plan based on Charlie's notes and my own marketing background. I'd like your honest feedback." For the next hour, we discussed the proposal. There were questions, suggestions, and constructive criticisms, but the overall response was positive. Even skeptical CFO Howard Parker grudgingly admitted that the marketing approach could potentially double their high-margin business within 2 years. "This is all quite promising," Martin said finally, "but I'm curious about implementation. Are you planning to hire a marketing director to execute this vision?" I took a deep breath. "Actually, I'd like to take a direct role in Westridge's operations, focusing specifically on marketing and business development." A surprised murmur went around the table. "You're proposing to work here?" Howard asked, his bushy eyebrows rising. "In Boise?" "Not exclusively," I clarified. "At least not immediately. I'd split my time between Seattle and Boise for the first few months, while bringing on additional marketing talent." I glanced at my watch. In fact, my first candidate should be calling in right about now. On cue, Margaret appeared at the door. "Ms. Lambert, there's a Zoe Chen on the conference line for you." We connected the call, and Zoe's confident voice filled the room. After introducing herself and briefly outlining her background in digital marketing strategy, she dove into her initial thoughts about Westridge's online presence and brand positioning. The team was visibly impressed by her insights, particularly when she demonstrated how quickly she'd assimilated information about their industry and competitors. After Zoe's call ended, there was a moment of silence before Sanjay spoke up. "I think your uncle would approve of this direction, Ms. Lambert." Martin nodded slowly. "Charlie always said Westridge needed to tell its story better. He just wasn't sure how to do it." "There are practical considerations," Howard interjected. "Budget implications, reorganization of reporting structures. All valid points," I acknowledged. "I'm not suggesting we implement everything immediately. What I'm asking for today is your support for this general direction and your permission to begin putting the foundation in place." One by one, they voiced their support. Even Howard eventually nodded his agreement, though with the caveat that all major expenditures would need standard financial review. "Thank you," I said, feeling a surge of genuine excitement. "Now, there's one more matter we need to address." I turned to Mr. Daniels, who pulled a document from his briefcase. "Ms. Lambert has asked me to prepare a legal declaration of intent regarding Westridge's ownership," he explained. "This document formally states that she has no intention of transferring ownership or control of Westridge Innovations to any other entity or individual at this time. It further establishes that any purported transfer documents not personally signed by Ms. Lambert in my presence are to be considered invalid." I signed the document, and Mr. Daniels notarized it immediately. "Is this necessary?" Martin asked, looking concerned. "It's a precaution," I said carefully. "There have been misunderstandings about my intentions for Westridge. I want to ensure absolute clarity." When the meeting concluded, I felt a strange mixture of elation and apprehension. I had set something in motion that couldn't easily be reversed, something that would inevitably bring me into direct conflict with Nate. As I stood in the parking lot preparing to leave, Margaret hurried out after me. "Ms. Lambert, Nessa, she corrected herself with a small smile. I just wanted to say, Charlie would be proud. He always said you had fire in you. I blinked back sudden tears. Thank you, Margaret. That means more than you know. On the drive back to the cabin, I finally turned my phone back on. There were 17 missed calls from Nate, along with dozens of texts ranging from irritated to furious. The most recent simply read, "Since you won't answer my calls, I'm coming to Boise. Flight lands at 8 p.m. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. I had expected this, but not quite so soon. Nate was coming to take control of the situation, to take control of me. But this time, I wasn't going to yield. For the first time in our relationship, I was prepared to stand my ground no matter the consequences. Uncle Charlie had given me more than a company. He had given me the opportunity to reclaim myself. And I wasn't going to let that slip away. As the sun began to set over the mountains, I sat on the cabin's porch swing, watching the sky turn, from blue to orange to deep purple. In a few hours, I would face the most difficult confrontation of my marriage. But for now, I allowed myself this moment of peace, drawing strength from the beauty around me and the memory of the man who had believed in me even when I had stopped believing in myself. I won't let you down, Uncle Charlie, I whispered to the gathering dusk. Not this time. Not anymore. I spent the remaining hours before Nate's arrival preparing myself mentally for what was to come. This wouldn't be like our usual disagreements, where I'd eventually concede to keep the peace. This was about something fundamental, not just Westridge, but my right to make my own decisions. As the time drew closer, I drove to the Boise airport, deliberately arriving just as Nate's flight was landing. I didn't want to give him any extra time to regain control of the situation. I spotted him immediately in the arrivals area, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit despite the late hour, his expression a careful mask of concern. "Vanessa," he said, his voice tight as he approached. "What's going on? I've been trying to reach you for days." "I've been busy," I replied calmly. "Let's talk in the car." The drive back to Uncle Charlie's cabin was tense. I focused on the road while Nate alternated between forced pleasantries and pointed questions about Westridge. I answered vaguely, sensing his mounting frustration. "I don't understand why you're being so difficult about this," he finally said. "It's a straightforward business decision. The longer you delay, the more potential value we're losing." "It's not we, Nate," I said quietly. "Westridge is my inheritance, not yours." He turned to look at me, surprise flickering across his features. "You can't be serious. We're married. Your assets are our assets." "Not in this case," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. "Uncle Charlie structured the inheritance specifically to remain separate property." Nate laughed incredulously. "And you think that matters? Any decent attorney can work around that. Besides, this isn't about legal technicalities. This is about what makes sense for our future." I didn't respond immediately, turning onto the gravel drive leading to the cabin. As we pulled up, Nate took in the rustic structure with obvious distaste. "This is where we're staying? There must be hotels in Boise." "This was Uncle Charlie's cabin," I said. "I'm comfortable here." Inside, Nate walked around the living room, examining the modest furnishings and personal touches with barely concealed disdain. "So this is where you've been hiding out? Playing mountain woman while ignoring your responsibilities back home?" "I haven't been hiding," I said, hanging my jacket by the door. "I've been learning about the company I've inherited and making informed decisions about its future." "And what decisions have you made?" he asked, his tone deceptively casual. I met his gaze directly. "I'm not selling or transferring Westridge, Nate. I'm going to run it myself." The silence that followed was absolute. Nate stared at me as if I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. "That's absurd," he finally said. "You have no experience running a manufacturing company." "I have," 10 years of marketing experience and a deep understanding of brand positioning and business development, I countered. The operational aspects are already handled by a capable executive team who knew Uncle Charlie for decades. This is about sentimentality, not business, Nate said dismissively. You're letting your emotions cloud your judgment. Actually, I've been incredibly rational, I replied, walking to my bag and retrieving the marketing strategy I'd developed. Here's my preliminary plan for Westridge's growth. It leverages their existing technical expertise while expanding into more profitable market segments. Nate glanced at the document without really reading it. Vanessa, be realistic. You have a career in Seattle. Our life is there. You can't possibly commute to Boise regularly. I've already discussed it with Martin, the COO. I'll split my time between Seattle and Boise initially, while building a marketing team here. Nate's composure finally cracked. This is ridiculous. You're throwing away a significant financial opportunity because you're sentimental about your uncle's little company. Westridge isn't little, I said calmly. It's a specialized manufacturer with proprietary technology and over 200 skilled employees. And it's not just a financial opportunity. It's people's livelihoods. People adapt, Nate repeated his earlier dismissal. That's business. I studied my husband's face. The handsome features I'd once found so compelling now twisted with frustration that I wasn't complying with his wishes. Had he always been this way, or had I simply failed to see it? Why did you try to access my work email? I asked suddenly. Nate froze momentarily, then recovered. What are you talking about? Zoe told me you came to the office looking for files. Then someone tried to hack into my email remotely. Was that you? Your colleague is exaggerating, he said smoothly. I simply needed some information for our accountant about your benefits, since we're doing tax planning. When the office wouldn't help, I tried to access it from home. The lie was so effortless that for a moment I almost believed him. Almost. What were you really looking for, Nate? His expression hardened. I don't appreciate being interrogated by my wife. And I don't appreciate my husband trying to hack into my private email, I responded. What were you afraid I might have? Communications with Mr. Daniels? Information about Westridge that you could use? This is ridiculous, he snapped. You're creating conspiracy theories to justify your irrational behavior. I sighed, suddenly tired of the circular argument. I think we both need some sleep. We can discuss this more tomorrow. I showed him to the spare bedroom, ignoring his complaints about the firmness of the mattress and the lack of an ensuite bathroom. As I closed my own bedroom door, I heard him on his phone, speaking in low, urgent tones. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Nate was plotting his next move. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake, replaying our conversation, and strengthening my resolve for what I knew would come next. Nate would escalate. He always did when he didn't get his way immediately. The question was how, and whether I would be prepared. Morning came with the smell of coffee. I followed the aroma to the kitchen, where Nate stood in a crisp button-down shirt and slacks, his expression pleasant as he poured 2 cups. I thought we could start fresh today, he said, offering me a mug. I may have been too harsh last night. The flight, the stress of not being able to reach you, it put me on edge. I accepted the coffee warily. This was Nate's typical pattern. After an argument, the charming reconciliation that made me doubt my own perceptions. I understand why you feel connected to Westridge, he continued smoothly. It's your uncle's legacy, and you want to honor that. I respect that, truly. I sipped my coffee, waiting for the pivot I knew was coming. But I think there's a way to honor Charlie's legacy while still making a smart business decision, Nate said, his voice reasonable and measured. What if we integrated Westridge into Morgan Financial as a separate division? You could oversee its marketing direction, maintain its unique culture, while still benefiting from our resources and connections. It was a masterful offer, one that on the surface appeared to be a reasonable compromise. The old me would have accepted it gratefully, believing I had won a partial victory. "That's an interesting proposal," I said carefully. "But it still involves transferring ownership of Westridge away from me." Nate's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "It would be a restructuring, not a transfer. The value would still be shared between us. But control would rest with Morgan. Financial, I pointed out, and ultimately, with you and Derek." "That's how business partnerships work, Nessa," he said with a hint of condescension. "Shared control, shared benefits." I set down my coffee mug. "Except our marriage has never been about shared control, has it? It's always been about you making decisions and me eventually agreeing with them." The pleasant mask slipped. "That's unfair. I've always considered your opinions." "Considered, yes. But when have you ever actually changed course based on my input? When have you ever compromised on something that mattered to you?" Nate's jaw tightened. "I didn't fly all the way to Boise to be psychoanalyzed. We're discussing a business transaction." "No, we're discussing the fundamental dynamic of our relationship," I said, surprised by my own clarity. "And Westridge is just highlighting what's been true all along. You expect me to yield to your judgment, regardless of my own thoughts or feelings." "This is absurd," Nate said, setting his mug down with a sharp click. "You're turning a straightforward business discussion into some kind of marital drama. The fact that you can't see how they're connected is exactly the problem," I replied. Nate checked his watch, an expensive timepiece I'd given him for our anniversary the previous year. "I have a conference call in 30 minutes. We can continue this conversation afterward." He retreated to the spare bedroom with his phone, closing the door firmly behind him. I heard the murmur of his voice as he made multiple calls, no doubt strategizing with Derek or their attorneys about how to handle my unexpected resistance. While he was occupied, I made a call of my own to Mr. Daniels. "Has anything been filed?" I asked without preamble. "Nothing yet," the attorney replied. "But I did receive a rather pointed call from a Seattle law firm this morning, inquiring about the exact structure of your inheritance. I declined to provide details without your authorization." "Thank you," I said, relief flooding through me. "If they file anything, I'll call you immediately," he assured me. "The declaration you signed yesterday gives us solid footing, but still, tread carefully." After hanging up, I called Martin at Westridge to update him on the situation and ensure security protocols were tightened around the company's systems. The last thing I needed was Nate or Derek trying to access sensitive business information. When Nate emerged from the bedroom an hour later, his demeanor had shifted again. The charming, reasonable facade was gone, replaced by cold determination. "I've been patient, Vanessa, but this has gone far enough," he said. "You're making a serious mistake that could have lasting consequences for both of us." "What kind of consequences?" I asked. "Financial, for one," he said. "If you insist on this stubborn course, it will affect our entire investment strategy. The vacation property in Aspen we've been considering, that would have to be reconsidered. The country club membership, possibly no longer feasible." I nearly laughed at the transparency of the threats. These were things Nate valued, not me. "I can live with those consequences," I said simply. His eyes narrowed. "There are other considerations as well. Your position at Crawford and Barnes, for instance. Tim Crawford and I have investments together. If he understood that you were acting against our joint financial interests." Now he was threatening my job. I felt a chill, but also a strange sense of clarity. This was who Nate truly was. Someone who would leverage every connection, apply pressure at every vulnerable point to get what he wanted. "Are you actually threatening to interfere with my career if I don't sign over my inheritance?" I asked, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "I'm simply pointing out the interconnected nature of our lives," Nate replied smoothly. Actions have consequences, Vanessa. That's reality. In that moment, something crystallized within me, a resolve that had been forming since I first set foot in Westridge. You're right, Nate. Actions do have consequences. I walked to the kitchen counter and picked up my phone. Which is why I've taken certain precautions. What does that mean? It means I've signed a formal declaration of intent regarding Westridge's ownership, stating explicitly that I have no intention of transferring it to you or Morgan Financial. I've also documented your attempts to pressure me, including this conversation. Nate's face reddened. You're recording me? That's illegal. Idaho is a one-party consent state, I replied calmly, though I wasn't actually recording. But that's beside the point. The point is that I'm no longer the compliant wife who eventually gives in to keep the peace. Westridge is mine, and I'm keeping it. For a moment, naked fury crossed Nate's face, a glimpse of the rage that had always simmered beneath his controlled exterior. Then, like a mask sliding back into place, his expression became coldly professional. You've clearly made your decision, he said. I hope you're prepared for what comes next. Is that another threat? It's a statement of fact, he replied. You're choosing to act against our joint interests. That has implications for our marriage. I'm choosing to honor my uncle's wishes and protect 200 people's jobs, I countered. If that threatens our marriage, then perhaps our foundation wasn't as solid as I thought. Nate gathered his things with methodical precision. I'm taking the next flight back to Seattle. We can discuss the status of our relationship when you return, assuming you still consider Seattle your home. I'll be back next week, I said. I have matters to arrange here first. He paused at the door. One last chance, Vanessa. Sign the transfer documents, and we can put this unfortunate episode behind us. I met his gaze steadily. No. Something shifted in his eyes, a cold calculation replacing the anger. Very well, safe travels. And with that, he was gone. I sank onto the couch, adrenaline still coursing through my system. I had directly defied Nate for the first time in our marriage, and the earth hadn't swallowed me whole. Instead, I felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. Fear of what he might do next, but exhilaration at finally standing my ground. My phone buzzed with a text from Martin. Security protocols updated at Westridge. All sensitive systems now require additional verification. Take care. I smiled at the simple message of support. In just a few days, the people at Westridge had shown me more genuine respect than Nate had in years of marriage. The next week passed in a blur of activity. I worked with the Westridge team to refine the marketing strategy, interviewed potential, marketing staff with Zoe's remote assistance, and met with key clients to introduce myself. Every day brought new challenges, but also a growing sense of confidence in my abilities. Mr. Daniels kept me informed of legal developments. As expected, Nate's attorneys had begun exploring ways to challenge the structure of my inheritance, but Charlie's careful planning had created substantial barriers. For now, at least, Westridge was secure. The night before my scheduled return to Seattle, I sat on the cabin's porch swing, watching the sunset and reflecting on how much had changed in such a short time. 2 weeks ago, I had been Nate's accommodating wife, gradually surrendering my identity to maintain the peace. Now, I was standing firm in my own convictions, rediscovering strengths I had forgotten I possessed. My phone rang. Zoe calling from Seattle. How's the mountain air treating you, boss lady? She asked cheerfully. I laughed at the nickname. Clearer than I remembered. How are things there? Her voice turned serious. That's actually why I'm calling. There are some developments you should know about before you get back. What kind of developments? Your husband has been busy, she said grimly. He's been talking to Tim Crawford. Nothing explicit, but enough hints that Tim called me into his office today to ask about your situation. Just as Nate had threatened, using his connection to my boss to apply pressure. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "The truth," Zoe replied. "That you've inherited a company and are exploring your options, that it's your separate property, not marital assets, and that any attempt to interfere with your employment based on personal matters could be legally problematic." I smiled at her fierceness. "You didn't." "I absolutely did," she confirmed. "Tim backpedaled so fast he nearly fell out of his chair. Said he was just concerned about your workload, wanted to make sure you had the support you needed." "Thank you," I said, softly, "for having my back." "Always," she replied. "But there's more. Nate's been at the office several times, supposedly for lunch with Tim. But he's made a point of chatting with various colleagues about your stress levels and difficult family situation. He's laying groundwork, Nessa." "For what? If I had to guess?" "For a narrative where you're making irrational decisions due to grief or stress, creating doubt about your judgment." It was exactly the kind of subtle manipulation Nate excelled at, not direct confrontation, but positioning and undermining, creating an environment where others would question me so he wouldn't have to. "There's one more thing," Zoe continued, hesitantly. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but Derek Foster has been reaching out to Westridge clients. 2 of them mentioned it to me when I called them about the marketing research." My hand tightened on the phone. "What is he saying to them?" "Suggesting that Westridge might be experiencing leadership transition issues that could affect delivery schedules, offering Morgan Financial Services as a stabilizing partner. They were attempting to create uncertainty among Westridge's clients, potentially damaging the company's reputation to force my hand. That's..." I struggled to find words for my anger. "Unethical? Borderline illegal? Yeah," Zoe agreed. "But not surprising, given what you've told me about them." After we hung up, I called Martin immediately to warn him about the client outreach. He was concerned but not panicked. "We've worked with most of these clients for decades," he said. "They trust us, but still we should be proactive. I'll reach out personally to our key accounts tomorrow." I spent the rest of the evening preparing for my return to Seattle, not just practically, but mentally. Nate was escalating, using every lever at his disposal to pressure me. I needed to be ready. When my flight landed at SeaTac the next afternoon, I half expected to see Nate waiting at arrivals, ready with another charm offensive or set of threats. Instead, the condo was empty when I arrived, though signs of his presence were everywhere. A coffee cup in the sink, his workout clothes draped over the bathroom door, files spread across the dining table. I unpacked slowly, reacquainting myself with the space that had been our home. It felt different now, as if I were seeing it through new eyes. The expensive furniture that Nate had insisted on, the artwork chosen to impress rather than inspire, the overall aesthetic that reflected his taste rather than mine. How had I not noticed before how little of myself existed in this space? As I hung my clothes in the closet, I noticed subtle changes. My things had been rearranged, some items moved to less accessible areas. Nate had been reorganizing in my absence, literally shifting my possessions to the margins. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. I was contemplating this when I heard the front door open and close. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the living room. Nate stood there in his tailored suit, briefcase in hand, looking every inch the successful businessman. His expression revealed nothing as he regarded me. "You're back," he said flatly. "As planned," I replied. He set down his briefcase and loosened his tie. "I assume you've had time to reconsider your position." "I've had time to become even more certain of it," I corrected, especially after learning about Derek's calls to Westridge clients. A flicker of surprise crossed his face before he composed himself. "Derek is doing his due diligence on a potential acquisition. Standard business practice." Undermining a company's relationship with its clients is not due diligence, I said. It's a pressure tactic, and it's unethical. Nate poured himself a scotch from the bar cart without offering me one. This isn't personal, Vanessa. It's business. It became personal the moment you threatened my career. He took a slow sip, studying me over the rim of his glass. I merely pointed out potential consequences. If you perceived that as a threat, perhaps that says more about your state of mind than my intentions. His ability to twist reality was truly remarkable. For years, I had allowed these manipulations to make me doubt myself, to question my own perceptions until I eventually yielded to his. My state of mind is clearer than it's been in years, I said. Crystal clear, in fact. I'm keeping Westridge, and I'm going to run it my way. That's non-negotiable. Nate set down his glass with deliberate care. Then we have a problem. The problem is that you see my inheritance as something you're entitled to control, I replied, just as you've gradually taken control of every other aspect of our lives. That's ridiculous, he scoffed. You've always had freedom to make your own choices. As long as they ultimately aligned with yours, I pointed out. When was the last time I made a significant decision that you disagreed with and you actually accepted it? He dismissed the question with a wave of his hand. I won't engage in this kind of psychoanalysis. The fact remains that you're making a foolish business decision out of sentimentality, and it's affecting our future. No, I'm making a sound business decision based on my understanding of Westridge's potential, I countered. And yes, it's affecting our future, because for the first time, I'm not yielding to your judgment over my own. Nate studied me with narrowed eyes, as if seeing a stranger. In some ways, I supposed I was. The woman standing before him now was not the compliant wife he had grown accustomed to. This isn't like you, he said finally. Actually, this is exactly like me, I replied. The real me, the one I'd forgotten under years of compromise and accommodation. He shook his head dismissively. It's grief. You're not thinking clearly because of your uncle's death. You've attached undue significance to this inheritance because it was his final gift to you. This was a new tack, positioning my decision as emotional rather than rational, a temporary aberration that would pass once I came to my senses. It was insidious because it contained just enough truth to be plausible. I was still grieving Uncle Charlie. My grief is real, I acknowledged, but my business assessment is sound. Westridge has potential that would be wasted if it were simply absorbed into Morgan Financial. You can't possibly know that, Nate insisted. You spent, 10 days there? I've been building and restructuring companies for 15 years. This isn't your area of expertise. Again, just enough truth to sting. I wasn't an experienced executive, but I was also not the naive amateur he was portraying me as. Then I'll learn, I said simply, just as I've learned and excelled in every other professional challenge I've taken on. Nate's expression darkened. While you're learning, you're putting a considerable asset at risk. Our asset. My asset, I corrected firmly. Legally and morally mine, based on Uncle Charlie's explicit wishes. He slammed his glass down on the counter. Enough. This stubborn defiance has gone on long enough. You're making a mistake that affects both of us, and I won't stand by and watch it happen. What exactly are you going to do, Nate? I asked. Quietly. Threaten my job again? Undermine me with colleagues? Try to damage Westridge's business relationships? I'm prepared for all of that now. Something cold and calculating entered his eyes. There are other approaches. Our prenuptial agreement has specific clauses regarding the acquisition of assets during marriage. My attorneys believe we have grounds to challenge your uncle's attempt to circumvent those provisions. I had expected this, but it still sent a chill through me. You would actually take legal action against your own wife over her inheritance? I would protect our joint financial interests despite your temporary emotional state, he corrected smoothly. It would be for your own good in the long run. For my own good. How many times had Nate justified controlling behavior with those words? How many times had I accepted the premise that he knew better than I did what was best for me? I think we need some space, I said, my decision crystallizing as I spoke. I'm going to stay with Zoe for a few days while we figure this out. Running away won't solve anything, Nate said dismissively. I'm not running away, I replied. I'm giving us both room to think clearly without escalating this further. His expression shifted, turning suddenly conciliatory. Nessa, we don't need to be apart. Let's talk this through rationally. I'm sure we can find a compromise that works for both of us. The rapid pivot from threats to reconciliation was a familiar pattern, one designed to keep me off balance, to prevent me from following through on any decision that might decrease his control. I think space is exactly what we need right now, I said, standing firm. I'll pack a bag. As I moved toward the bedroom, Nate followed, his tone growing increasingly urgent. This is unnecessary, Vanessa. We can resolve this here, now. What would it take? A formal role for you at Westridge after the acquisition? A dedicated budget for the initiatives you believe in? I'm willing to be flexible. I continued packing methodically. Clothes, toiletries, my laptop. I added the blue folder containing Uncle Charlie's notes, which I had brought back from Boise. This isn't a negotiation, I said quietly. I've made my decision about Westridge. What we need to figure out now is what that means for us. Nate's face hardened again. If you walk out that door, you're making a statement about your priorities. And if you're making threats about my inheritance, you're making a statement about yours, I countered. He blocked the bedroom doorway. Think carefully about what you're doing, Vanessa. Actions have consequences. I looked at my husband. This man I had loved, whose approval I had sought so desperately for years, and felt a strange sense of calm. I'm well aware of that, I said. Please move. For a moment, I thought he might refuse. Then, with deliberate slowness, he stepped aside. I walked past him, bag in hand, feeling his eyes on my back as I headed for the door. This isn't over, he called after me. Not by a long shot. I paused with my hand on the doorknob, turning back to look at him one last time. No, it isn't. But for the first time, I'm not afraid of what comes next. As I stepped into the hallway and pulled the door closed behind me, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The future was uncertain, filled with potential challenges and conflicts, but for the first time in years, I was making choices based on my own judgment, my own values. Uncle Charlie's voice seemed to whisper in my mind. Trust yourself, Nessa. You've always had better instincts than you give yourself credit for. And finally, I was starting to believe him. The evening air felt cool against my face as I walked away from our condo building, wheeling my suitcase behind me. Though Zoe had offered to pick me up, I had decided to walk the 10 blocks to her apartment. I needed the time to clear my head. Seattle's downtown streets were still busy with early evening activity. People heading home from work, meeting friends for dinner, going about their normal lives. Just days ago, I had been one of them, moving through a carefully choreographed existence where I was more supporting character than protagonist. Now everything had shifted. When I arrived at Zoe's apartment in Capitol Hill, she opened the door, before I could even knock, pulling me into a fierce hug. "Proud of you," she whispered. Those 3 simple words brought unexpected tears to my eyes. How long had it been since someone had expressed pride in my choices rather than trying to reshape them? Zoe's apartment was the antithesis of the sleek, show-home aesthetic of my condo with Nate. Colorful artwork covered the walls, books were stacked on every surface, and mismatched furniture somehow combined to create a space that felt immediately welcoming. "Guest room's all set up," she said, taking my suitcase. "And I've got wine chilling. You look like you could use some." Over glasses of crisp Sauvignon Blanc, I recounted my confrontation with Nate. Zoe listened intently, her expressive face registering anger, concern, and occasional satisfaction as I described standing my ground. "He actually threatened legal action?" she asked incredulously. "Against his own wife? Over an inheritance?" "He framed it as protecting our joint financial interests?" I replied, mimicking Nate's smooth, reasonable tone. Zoe snorted. "Convenient how your interests always align perfectly with his plans, isn't it? And when they don't, suddenly you're being emotional or irrational." Her words struck a chord. Throughout our marriage, Nate had positioned himself as the rational decision-maker while casting my objections as emotional reactions to be managed rather than valid perspectives to be considered. "The thing is," I said slowly, "he's not entirely wrong about my experience. I haven't run a company before. I'm learning as I go." "So what?" Zoe challenged. "Every CEO was new once. You have marketing expertise, business acumen, and you're smart as hell. Plus, you've got an experienced team at Westridge who knows the industry inside out. What you don't know, you can learn." Her unwavering confidence bolstered my resolve. That's essentially what I told Nate, but he sees it as a foolish risk rather than an opportunity for growth. "Because it's not a risk he's controlling," Zoe pointed out. "That's what this is really about, isn't it? Control." The word hung in the air between us, crystallizing something I had been circling but hadn't fully articulated. Control. Nate had gradually accumulated it throughout our relationship. Subtle decisions about our home, our social circle, our finances, our future plans. Each individual instance seemed minor, reasonable even, but collectively, they formed a pattern of diminishing my autonomy. "What are you going to do now?" Zoe asked. I sighed, twirling my wine glass thoughtfully. "Professionally, I need to sort things out at Crawford and Barnes. If Nate's been laying groundwork with Tim, I need to address that directly. And personally?" The question was harder to answer. "I don't know yet. I need time to think, to gain perspective." Zoe nodded. "Well, you can stay here as long as you need. Mikasa and all that." That night, in the quiet of Zoe's guest room, I pulled out Uncle Charlie's blue folder again. Flipping through his strategic notes, I found myself drawing strength from his clear, practical thinking. He had seen Westridge's potential, had mapped a path forward that leveraged its unique strengths. And for some reason, he had believed I was the right person to execute that vision. Mixed among the business notes were occasional personal observations. Nessa has the marketing mind we need. Her ability to see how technical capabilities translate to client needs is exactly what will take Westridge to the next level. And later, need to structure this carefully. Important that Nessa has full control, not influenced by outside pressures or conflicting priorities. Had Uncle Charlie seen something in my marriage that I had been blind to? Had he structured my inheritance specifically to force a reckoning that was long overdue? I fell asleep with these questions swirling in my mind and awoke the next morning with new clarity. Whatever happened with my marriage, I was committed to honoring Uncle Charlie's faith in me by giving Westridge my best effort. At Crawford and Barnes that day, I went directly to Tim Crawford's office, requesting a meeting before he could summon me. His assistant's surprised expression suggested this wasn't the normal protocol, but she ushered me in nonetheless. Tim, a silver-haired man in his 60s with an old-school approach to business, looked up from his computer with barely concealed curiosity. "Vanessa, good to see you back. I understand you've had some family matters to attend to." "Yes," I replied, taking a seat without waiting to be invited. "My uncle's passing and the responsibilities that came with it, which I believe you've discussed with my husband." Tim had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "Nate and I did speak briefly. He expressed concern about how you're balancing these new obligations with your work here." I appreciate the concern, I said evenly, but my personal and professional obligations are mine to manage, and I'd prefer they remain separate from my husband's business relationships. Tim's eyebrows rose slightly at my directness. I had always been professionally competent, but rarely assertive in this way. Of course, he said carefully, though Nathan did raise some valid points about potential conflicts of interest, given your new ownership position. There are no conflicts, I stated firmly. Westridge operates in an entirely different industry from our clients here. I've already reviewed our ethics guidelines to confirm this. Tim nodded slowly. Nevertheless, perception matters in our business. Clients might question divided loyalties. Which is why I've drafted a clear delineation of my roles and responsibilities, I said, placing a document on his desk. I've outlined how I'll manage my time between Westridge and Crawford and Barnes, ensuring no compromise in the quality of work for our clients. Tim picked up the document, scanning it with practiced efficiency. This is quite thorough. I take both my responsibilities seriously, I replied. What I don't appreciate is having my professional judgment questioned based on discussions with my husband rather than with me directly. Tim set the document down, studying me with new interest. Fair point. I should have spoken with you first. Yes, you should have, I agreed, just as you would with any other executive in this firm. A moment of silence stretched between us before Tim nodded again, more decisively this time. The arrangement you've outlined seems workable, provided client service remains at our expected standards. We'll proceed on that basis. Thank you, I said, rising to leave. One more thing, Vanessa, Tim said, causing me to pause. Nathan mentioned you've been under significant stress lately. If you need additional support— What I need, I interrupted smoothly, is for my personal life to remain separate from my professional evaluations. I trust that won't be an issue going forward. Without waiting for a response, I walked out, back straight and head high. The conversation had gone better than I'd dared hope. Tim was old school enough to respect directness, even if it surprised him coming from me. By the end of the day, word had spread through the office about my new dual role. Colleagues stopped by my desk with questions and congratulations, their curiosity evident. I answered transparently, but kept the details of my personal situation private. After work, instead of heading to Zoe's apartment, I found myself drawn to the waterfront. Pike Place Market was winding down for the evening, most vendors packing up their stalls. I wandered through, breathing in the mingled scents of flowers, fish, and fresh produce, letting the familiar environment soothe my jangled nerves. At the edge of the market, I found a small cafe overlooking Elliott Bay and settled at a window table with a cup of tea. As the ferry boats crossed the darkening water, I pulled out my phone and did something I had been avoiding. I called my mother. She answered on the third ring, her voice immediately concerned. Vanessa? Is everything all right? It's not like you to call on a weekday. I'm fine, Mom, I assured her. Just wanted to check in. Well, that's nice, she said, sounding unconvinced. How are things with you and Nathan? He mentioned you've been going through a difficult time. Of course he had. Nate would never miss an opportunity to shape the narrative. When did you speak with Nate? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. He called yesterday, actually. Sounded worried about you. Said you'd been under terrible stress since Charlie's passing and might be making some hasty decisions. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that Mom was only hearing Nate's version of events. Mom, I've inherited Uncle Charlie's company, Westridge Innovations. It's an incredible opportunity, and I'm taking an active role in running it. Oh, honey? My mother's voice immediately took on that concerned, slightly patronizing tone I knew so well. Are you sure that's wise? You already have a demanding career, and Nathan mentioned the company needs significant restructuring. The company is financially sound, I corrected firmly, and I have the skills to help it grow. But surely Nathan would be better positioned to handle something like this, with his business background? The immediate assumption that Nate's judgment superseded mine was exactly what I had expected, yet it still stung. This is my inheritance, Mom. Uncle Charlie left Westridge to me specifically because he believed in my abilities. There was a pause before she responded. Charlie always did have unconventional ideas, but marriage is about partnership, Vanessa. You and Nathan need to make these decisions together. Partnership doesn't mean one person always defers to the other, I pointed out. And sometimes we need to make our own choices. What does that mean? My mother's voice sharpened with concern. Vanessa, what's going on? Nathan mentioned you weren't staying at home right now. I closed my eyes briefly, gathering my thoughts. Mom, Nate and I are having some disagreements about Westridge. I'm staying with a friend while we sort things out. You've left your husband? The shock in her voice was unmistakable. Over a business disagreement? Vanessa, It's not just about Westridge, I interrupted. It's about respect, about valuing each other's judgment and autonomy. Every marriage has challenges, she said dismissively. Your father and I certainly had our share, and that's why I think we may have been talking past each other. We both want what's best for Westridge. We just have different perspectives on how to achieve that. What exactly are you proposing? I asked, wanting to move beyond the pleasantries, to the substance. A true partnership, Nate replied. Not absorption into Morgan Financial as I initially suggested, but a collaborative approach where we combine our strengths. Your marketing vision with my financial expertise. It sounded reasonable on the surface, the kind of compromise that had so often led me to yield in the past. Except I now recognized it for what it was. Another path to the same destination, just with more steps. And how would this partnership be structured? I asked. In terms of ownership and decision-making authority? A flicker of something, annoyance perhaps, crossed Nate's face before his smooth mask returned. We could establish a joint holding company, with both of us having input on major decisions. The details would need to be worked out, of course. With you having final say on financial matters? I would certainly take the lead in areas where my expertise is stronger, he acknowledged. Just as you would in marketing and client relationships. Our first course arrived, giving me a moment to consider his proposal. It was crafted to appear like an equal partnership while preserving his ultimate control over the most crucial aspects of the business. It's an interesting proposition, I said after the server had departed. But it doesn't address the fundamental issue. Uncle Charlie left Westridge to me specifically, not to us as a couple. He structured it that way deliberately. Nate's expression hardened slightly. Charlie's intentions, while perhaps well-meaning, were based on limited information. He didn't understand our financial strategy or the opportunities available through Morgan Financial. Or perhaps he understood perfectly, I countered. Perhaps he saw that Westridge would be better served remaining independent, rather than becoming a small piece of a larger portfolio. That's naive, Vanessa, Nate said, his tone taking on the condescending edge I had come to recognize. In today's market, scale is essential. Independent companies like Westridge are vulnerable. Westridge has thrived for 40 years because of its specialized expertise in client relationships, I replied. Its size is actually an advantage in its market niche. Nate shook his head, his expression a mixture of disappointment and frustration. This is exactly why emotional attachment clouds business judgment. You're clinging to an outdated model because it was Charlie's. The accusation was so predictable, I almost smiled. When logical argument failed, Nate always reverted to questioning my rationality. Actually, I'm advocating for a model that leverages Westridge's unique strengths rather than diluting them, I said calmly. But this conversation is going in circles, Nate. My decision stands. I'm keeping Westridge independent and taking an active role in its management. He set down his fork, all pretense of a pleasant dinner evaporating. And what about our marriage? Does that factor into your decision at all? The question hung between us, heavy with implication. I met his gaze steadily. Our marriage should be strong enough to withstand me making independent choices about my inheritance, I said. If it's not, then we have deeper issues to address. This isn't about your independence, Nate argued. It's about making decisions that affect our joint future without proper consideration. I have considered it thoroughly, I countered. What you really mean is that I've reached a different conclusion than you would prefer. Nate's jaw tightened. You're being unreasonable. No, I'm being decisive, I corrected. But you don't just walk away when things get difficult. I thought about my parents' marriage, my father's dominance, my mother's constant accommodation. Was that really the model I wanted to emulate? I haven't walked away, I clarified. I've created space to think clearly without pressure. Well, from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're throwing away a wonderful marriage over stubbornness, my mother retorted. Nathan has given you a beautiful life. I've contributed to building that life too, Mom, I said quietly. And beauty isn't everything if it comes at the cost of your voice. The silence that followed told me my words had hit home in some way, though I doubted they had changed her mind. My mother had made her choices long ago and had constructed justifications to support them. Just promise me you'll think carefully before you do anything rash, she finally said. Marriages like yours don't come along every day. After we hung up, I sat watching the ferries cross the bay, their lights bright against the darkening water. My mother was right about one thing. I needed to think carefully about my next steps. Not because I owed it to Nate, but because I owed it to myself to make decisions with clarity rather than reaction. My phone buzzed with a text from Nate. We need to talk. Dinner tomorrow? Le Petit Cochon at 7? Le Petit Cochon was one of Seattle's most exclusive restaurants, a place where public scenes were unthinkable and discretion was guaranteed. A strategic choice on Nate's part. I typed back, I'll be there. Better to face whatever came next directly, rather than prolonging the uncertainty. The following day was a whirlwind of activity. I had morning meetings at Crawford and Barnes, then a video conference with the Westridge executive team to discuss our marketing initiatives. Sanjay presented progress on a new technical solution that had significant potential, while Martin updated me on client relationships. No one had defected despite Derek's efforts, which was reassuring. By late afternoon, I was focused on preparing for my dinner with Nate. If our previous interactions were any indication, he would arrive with a strategy, either renewed pressure, a fresh attempt at manipulation, or perhaps a new compromise designed to appear reasonable while still achieving his primary goal. As I dressed in Zoe's apartment, choosing a simple black sheath dress that conveyed both professionalism and confidence, she offered some final advice. Remember, he's going to try to make you doubt yourself, she said. That's his superpower. Making. You question your own perceptions until you give in? I nodded, applying a final touch of lipstick. I know his playbook now. That's the difference. Le Petit Cochon was housed in a converted historic building in Pioneer Square, its understated entrance marked only by a small brass plaque. Inside, soft lighting and well-spaced tables created an atmosphere of intimate luxury. Nate was already seated when I arrived, rising politely as the maitre d' led me to the table. He looked impeccable as always in a tailored suit, his expression pleasant but unreadable. You look lovely, he said, pulling out my chair. Thank you, I replied, settling in. This is quite the venue for a discussion. I thought neutral territory would be beneficial, he said smoothly, signaling for the sommelier. And their wine list is exceptional. Once our wine had been poured and our orders taken, Nate leaned forward slightly, his expression turning serious but sympathetic. I've had time to reflect on our situation, he began, and I may have been too forceful in my approach. For that, I apologize. The apology, though impeccably delivered, immediately put me on guard. Nate rarely apologized unless it was strategic. I appreciate that, I said neutrally, waiting for what would come next. Your attachment to Westridge is understandable, he continued. Charlie was important to you, and this is his legacy. I should have been more sensitive to that emotional component. There it was again, the subtle framing of my decision as emotional rather than rational. My decision about Westridge isn't based on emotion, I corrected. It's based on business analysis and personal conviction. Nate took a sip of his wine, his expression thoughtful. Of course. There's a difference. We ate the remainder of our meal in tense silence, the exquisite food wasted on the bitter atmosphere. When the dessert menus arrived, I declined, eager to bring the charade to an end. We still need to discuss where we go from here, Nate said as the server cleared our plates. Yes, we do, I agreed. But not tonight. We both need time to think. I've had plenty of time to think while you've been staying with your friend, he said, a hint of accusation in his tone. The question is simple. Are you coming home? Home. The word carried such weight, such expectation. Was the condo we shared truly my home, or just a beautiful space where I had gradually surrendered pieces of myself? Not yet, I said finally. I need more time. Nate signaled for the check, his expression darkening. Time isn't going to change the fundamental facts, Vanessa. Either you're committed to our marriage and our joint future, or you're prioritizing this personal project over our relationship. The ultimatum was so perfectly Nate, forcing a complex situation into a binary choice where either option served his interests. Either I returned to the marriage on his terms, or I became the villain who chose business over love. That's a false dichotomy, I said as he signed the check. I can be committed to our marriage and still maintain my independence regarding Westridge. The question is whether you can accept that. Outside the restaurant, the spring evening had turned cool. Nate hailed a rideshare with practiced efficiency. Where should I tell them to take you? He asked, his tone neutral, but with an undercurrent of challenge. Home? Or back to your friend's place? Zoe's, I replied without hesitation. Something shifted in Nate's expression. A recognition, perhaps, that this wasn't following his script. Normally, by this point in our conflicts, I would be seeking reconciliation, willing to compromise to restore harmony. This separation isn't sustainable, Vanessa, he said as the car pulled up. Sooner or later, you'll have to make a real decision. I met his gaze directly. I already have. The question is whether you can accept it. As the car pulled away, from the curb, I caught a glimpse of Nate's face in the side mirror. The frustration and confusion of a man who was suddenly finding his carefully constructed reality shifting beneath his feet. Back at Zoe's apartment, I found her curled up on the couch with her laptop, working late as usual. She looked up expectantly as I entered. How did it go? I kicked off my heels and sank onto the couch beside her. About as expected, he presented. A compromise that would still give him control, then got frustrated when I didn't accept it. Shocker, Zoe said dryly. What's his next move? He's framing it as a choice between our marriage and Westridge, I replied. As if I can't have both on my terms. Zoe closed her laptop, giving me her full attention. And what do you want? Not what Nate wants, not what your mom thinks you should do, not even what Charlie might have hoped for. What do you, Vanessa Lambert, actually want? The question was so direct, so focused on my desires rather than others' expectations, that it momentarily left me speechless. What did I want? I want to honor Uncle Charlie's faith in me by giving Westridge my best effort, I said slowly. I want to see if I can help it grow and thrive. And personally? Zoe pressed. I stared at the ceiling, searching for words to articulate feelings I had barely allowed myself to acknowledge. I want My voice caught. I want a relationship where I don't have to constantly shrink myself to keep the peace, where my judgment is valued, not tolerated until I eventually align with his, where I can make decisions without calculating how to minimize his displeasure. Saying it aloud felt both liberating and terrifying, naming the reality of my marriage after years of careful rationalization. "Do you think that's possible with Nate?" Zoe asked gently. "I don't know," I admitted. 7 years of patterns don't change overnight, but I also don't want to walk away without at least trying to rebuild on more equal footing. Zoe nodded thoughtfully. "Fair enough. Just remember that you deserve that equal footing, regardless of what happens with Westridge, or your marriage." The next day, I received an unexpected call from Mr. Daniels. "Ms. Lambert, I thought you should know that Morgan Financial has made a direct offer to purchase Westridge," he said without preamble. "What?" I sat up straighter at my desk at Crawford & Barnes. "How is that possible? I own the controlling interest." "They've approached the minority shareholders, primarily former executives and Charlie's old business partners," Mr. Daniels explained. "If they secure those shares, they'd own roughly 30% of the company. Not enough for control, but enough to create significant complications for management." I pinched the bridge of my nose, thinking rapidly. Can they do this legally? "There's nothing preventing them from purchasing available shares," Mr. Daniels confirmed. "The minority shareholders are under no obligation to refuse their offer." "And is it a good offer?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. "Very generous," he admitted. "Well above market value." Nate and Derek were executing another strategy. If they couldn't get me to transfer my shares, they would buy up enough of the company to exert pressure from within. It was clever, I had to admit, and entirely legal. "What are my options?" I asked. "You could match their offer to the minority shareholders," Mr. Daniels suggested. "Though that would require significant capital. Or you could let them proceed and deal with having Morgan Financial as a major shareholder." Neither option was appealing. Matching the offer would stretch my financial resources to the breaking point, while allowing Morgan Financial to gain a foothold in Westridge would create ongoing management challenges. "Let me think about it," I said, "and please let me know if any shareholders accept their offer." After hanging up, I stared blindly at my computer screen. This was Nate's response to my continued refusal, an end run around me that demonstrated both his resourcefulness and his determination. He was making it clear that if I wouldn't yield willingly, he would find another way to achieve his goals. The question was how to respond. I could liquidate some of my own investments to match the offer, but that would leave me financially vulnerable. Or I could try to convince the minority shareholders to reject Morgan Financial's offer, based on loyalty to Charlie's vision. As I weighed my options, a third possibility began to form in my mind, one that would require courage and creativity, but might preserve both Westridge's independence and my own financial security. I reached for my phone and made 3 calls in rapid succession, first to Martin at Westridge, then to Zoe, and finally to a former client who now worked at one of Seattle's top venture capital firms. By the end of the day, I had the outline of a counter-strategy that excited me more than anything had in years. It would be risky, challenging, and would irrevocably alter my relationship with Nate. But it also offered the possibility of something I had been gradually losing in my marriage: the freedom to chart my own course. That evening, as I worked late at Zoe's dining table refining my plan, my phone lit up with a text from Nate. "We need to talk about Morgan Financial's offer to Westridge minority shareholders." This could have been avoided. The message was pure Nate, factual yet implicitly threatening, with a touch of "I told you so" for good measure. I didn't respond immediately, focusing instead on the presentation I was preparing. Hours later, when I finally crawled into bed, exhausted but energized by the path ahead, I sent a single reply: "Yes, we do need to talk." My office at Crawford and Barnes, 10 a.m. tomorrow. For once, I would be setting the terms of our meeting. Not in a restaurant of his choosing. Not in our shared home where his influence permeated every surface, but on professional ground where I felt most confident. Whatever happened next, I was done reacting to Nate's moves. It was time to make my own. The morning light filtered through the windows of my office at Crawford and Barnes as I arranged the presentation materials on the conference table. I had arrived early, wanting time to center myself before Nate arrived. This meeting would determine not just the future of Westridge, but of my marriage as well. At precisely 10 a.m., my assistant ushered Nate in. He was impeccably dressed as always, his expression a careful mask of professional neutrality. Only someone who knew him as well as I did could see the tension in the set of his shoulders, the slight tightness around his eyes. "Thank you for coming," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. "Your choice of venue is interesting," he remarked, glancing around my office. "I would have thought this conversation deserved more privacy." "This is a business discussion," I replied evenly. My office seemed appropriate. Nate unbuttoned, his suit jacket as he sat down, his movements deliberate. "Let's get to the point then. Morgan Financial has made a very generous offer to Westridge's minority shareholders. Several have already expressed interest in accepting." "I'm aware," I said. "Mr. Daniels informed me yesterday." "This could have been avoided if you'd been reasonable from the beginning," Nate continued. "Now we're in a situation where Morgan Financial will likely become a significant shareholder in Westridge, creating complications for everyone." "Is that why you arranged this maneuver?" I asked. "To create complications unless I yield?" A flicker of surprise crossed his face, perhaps at my directness, perhaps at my calm. "It's simply good business. If we can't acquire controlling interest through you, we'll build our position through other means." "And then what?" I pressed. "You'll use that position to pressure me until I eventually surrender the rest of the shares?" Nate spread his hands in a gesture of reasonableness. "Or we could find a way to work together. Coexistence is possible, though obviously less efficient than full integration." I nodded thoughtfully, as if considering his words. "I've been thinking about coexistence as well, but perhaps in a different form than you're envisioning." I opened the folder in front of me and slid several documents across the table. "This is my counterproposal." Nate's eyebrows rose slightly as he picked up the first document, scanning it quickly. His expression shifted from curious to incredulous as he moved through the pages. "You can't be serious," he finally said, looking up at me. "I'm completely serious," I replied calmly. "I've secured partnership interest from Cascade Venture Partners to fund a management buyout of all minority shares in Westridge. Additionally, we'll be establishing a new marketing subsidiary focused on bringing Westridge's technical innovations to broader markets. Zoe will be joining me as co-director of this initiative." Nate stared at me, momentarily speechless. "I," continued, my voice steady. "The venture capital is already committed. The paperwork is being drafted. By this time next week, Westridge will be wholly owned by the new partnership structure, with me maintaining controlling interest." "This is absurd," Nate finally managed. "You've had no time to put something like this together. Venture capital deals take months to negotiate." "Typically, yes," I acknowledged. "But James Thornton at Cascade has been following Westridge's innovations for years." When I showed him Uncle Charlie's strategic plan and our new marketing initiative, he recognized the potential immediately. It wasn't just bravado. Everything I'd described was real. The previous day had been a whirlwind of calls, meetings, and negotiations, culminating in a tentative agreement that would secure Westridge's future and expand its potential. "You've gone behind my back," Nate said, his voice hardening, "making major financial decisions without consulting me." The irony of his accusation wasn't lost on me. "Just as you did when you approached Westridge's minority shareholders." "That was different," he insisted. I was protecting our joint interests. No, I said quietly. You were pursuing your interests, regardless of mine. The difference is that I'm being transparent about my actions. I slid one more document across the table. This is the other matter we need to discuss. Nate picked it up warily, his expression darkening as he read. Separation papers? You can't be serious. I am, I said, my voice steady despite the churning in my stomach. I believe we need formal space to determine whether our marriage can continue on more equal terms. All this over a company? Nate asked incredulously. You're willing to throw away 7 years of marriage because of your uncle's inheritance? This isn't about Westridge, I replied. It's about recognizing a pattern that's been present throughout our relationship. You make decisions, I eventually comply. You set the terms, I adapt to them. That's not partnership, Nate. That's control. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window and back. This is ridiculous. Every marriage involves compromise. Sometimes, one person takes the lead, sometimes the other. When have you ever followed my lead on something important? I asked. When have you ever changed your position to align with mine rather than expecting the opposite? The question hung in the air between us. Nate's silence was more revealing than any defense he might have attempted. I don't want a divorce, I said more gently. But I need to know whether we can rebuild our relationship on more equal footing. And I can only discover that if I stand firmly in my own choices now. Nate's expression shifted between anger, disbelief, and calculation as he processed everything I'd said. Finally, he straightened his jacket with a sharp tug. You've clearly made up your mind, he said coldly. But don't expect me to wait patiently while you find yourself or whatever this is. I won't be put on hold indefinitely. I understand, I replied. I'm not asking for indefinite time, just space to stand in my own strength and see where that leaves us. He picked up the separation papers, folding them precisely before placing them in his inside jacket pocket. I'll have my attorney review these. At the door he paused, turning back to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You know, you've changed, Vanessa. Yes, I agreed simply. I have. After he left, I sat at my desk for a long time, processing the enormity of what had just happened. I had directly challenged Nate, not just regarding Westridge, but the fundamental nature of our relationship. I had taken a stand that couldn't be walked back or smoothed over with compromise. The sense of liberation was dizzying and terrifying. The next several weeks passed in a blur of activity. The management buyout proceeded with remarkable speed, thanks to James Thornton's enthusiasm for Westridge's potential. Zoe handed in her resignation at Crawford & Barnes and threw herself into developing our new marketing subsidiary with characteristic energy. I continued working at Crawford & Barnes while commuting to Boise 2 days a week. Tim Crawford, after initial skepticism, became supportive when he realized the arrangement might open new business opportunities between our firms. Nate and I communicated primarily through attorneys, though he did call occasionally, his tone alternating between conciliatory and coldly strategic. He had accepted the separation, but seemed to be treating it as a temporary inconvenience rather than a fundamental reassessment of our relationship. One rainy afternoon in June, about 2 months after our confrontation in my office, I received an unexpected message from Eleanor, Nate's mother. She was in Seattle and wanted to meet for tea. Curious and slightly apprehensive, I agreed. We met at a quiet tea room in Madison Park that Eleanor had always favored. She was waiting when I arrived, elegant as always in a tailored navy suit, her silver hair perfectly styled. Vanessa, she greeted me, rising slightly as I approached the table. Thank you for meeting me. I took the seat across from her, noting how she studied my appearance, perhaps looking for signs of stress or unhappiness. It's good to see you, Eleanor, I said, genuinely meaning it despite our complicated relationship. How have you been? Concerned, she replied directly. About you and Nathan. I nodded, accepting a cup of Earl Grey from the server before responding. I imagine he's shared his perspective on our separation. He has, Eleanor acknowledged, though I suspect there's more to the story. This surprised me. Eleanor had always taken Nate's side in any disagreement, subtly or overtly reinforcing his position as the decision-maker in our relationship. There usually is, I said carefully. Eleanor stirred her tea thoughtfully. Nathan tells me you've secured venture capital funding for your uncle's company and established a new marketing division, all while maintaining your position at Crawford and Barnes. It's been a busy few months, I admitted. Impressive, she said, her tone suggesting genuine admiration. Nathan didn't think you could pull it off. I couldn't hide my surprise at her frankness. Eleanor noted my reaction with a slight smile. You're wondering why I'm not automatically taking my son's side, she observed. The answer may surprise you. I recognize something in your situation that feels familiar. She set down her teacup with deliberate precision. My late husband, Nathan's father, was very similar to my son. Brilliant, determined, accustomed to having his way. For 38 years, I adapted to his preferences, smoothed his path, and suppressed my own inclinations to maintain harmony. I listened, fascinated by this glimpse into a history I'd never fully understood. After Gerald died, Eleanor continued, I discovered something unexpected. I didn't know who I was anymore. I had spent so long being Mrs. Gerald Morgan that Eleanor had faded away entirely. Her gaze met mine directly. The past 5 years have been about rediscovering her. It's been challenging and liberating. I had no idea, I said softly. Of course not. I maintained the appearance everyone expected, she replied. But watching you these past months, standing firm despite Nathan's pressure, building something of your own, I see you making a choice I never found the courage to make. The conversation shifted to safer topics after that, but Eleanor's unexpected candor lingered in my mind long after we parted. She had recognized in me a crossroads she had once faced and chosen differently. The revelation added another dimension to my understanding of Nate and the patterns that had shaped him. That evening, I sat on the balcony of my new apartment in Capitol Hill, watching the sunset paint Seattle's skyline in gold and pink. I had moved out of Zoe's guest room a month earlier, needing space to reflect without constant conversation, however well-intentioned. My phone rang, Nate's number appearing on the screen. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. I had lunch with my mother today, he said without preamble. She said something that's been bothering me. Oh? I kept my tone neutral, curious where this was heading. She said I should look closely at my father's life before following too precisely in his footsteps. Nate's voice held a note of confusion I rarely heard from him. That some of what I've interpreted as strength might actually have been rigidity. I remained silent, giving him space to continue. It made me think about us, he said after a pause. About the patterns you mentioned. I'm not saying I agree with your assessment entirely, but perhaps there's something worth examining there. It wasn't an apology or even a clear acknowledgement of the dynamics I'd named, but it was the first crack in the certainty that had characterized Nate's position throughout our separation, the first hint that he might be willing to reflect, rather than simply strategize. That seems like a valuable reflection, I said carefully. Would you be willing to meet? He asked. Not to negotiate or make decisions, but just to talk? Really talk, without positioning or ultimatums. I considered his request, searching for any hint of manipulation or strategy. What I heard instead was something unfamiliar in Nate's voice. Uncertainty. Yes, I said finally. I'd like that. As I ended the call, I had no illusions that one conversation would magically transform our relationship or that Nate would suddenly become a different person. The patterns of our marriage had been established over years and would not easily be remade. But for the first time, I faced the prospect of that conversation without fear or the need to carefully manage his reactions. I had found my footing, professionally at Westridge, personally in my new independence. Whatever happened, with Nate, I would no longer be approaching our relationship from a position of gradual surrender. Uncle Charlie's final gift hadn't just been a company to run, but a catalyst for reclaiming myself. Whether my marriage survived this transformation remained to be seen, but I knew with absolute certainty that I would never again silence my voice or doubt my judgment to keep someone else's world comfortable. The sun slipped below the horizon, darkness settling over the city. I remained on the balcony, savoring the quiet confidence that had replaced the constant anxiety of my former life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges at Westridge, a difficult conversation with Nate, and undoubtedly fresh complications I couldn't yet anticipate. But for the first time in years, I was meeting those challenges as the woman Uncle Charlie had always seen in me, strong, capable, and finally, completely herself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.